The basement had no windows, no clock, no mercy. Lena stopped counting the hours after the second night. Time no longer moved forward, it pressed down on her like the low ceiling above her head. The air smelled of damp stone and old rust, and every breath scraped her throat raw. Her wrists burned where rough plastic restraints bit into her skin, tight enough to hurt, loose enough to remind her that someone had chosen this. Above her, footsteps moved across the floor. Lena had learned their meaning. Slow steps meant indifference. Heavy steps meant anger. Soft, measured steps meant planning. Tonight, the steps were soft. Her stomach clenched with fear. She pressed her cheek against the freezing floor, trying to make herself smaller, quieter, like she had learned to do years ago. Once, she had dreams. Once, she had friends. But all of that had been taken piece by piece, until the basement became the final place where no one would hear her scream. The door opened. Light spilled down the stairs like a blade, cutting into her eyes. Lena squeezed them shut, heart pounding, as the man's shadow stretched toward her. "Have you learned your place?" he asked calmly. She nodded. Speaking often made things worse. Silence sometimes did too. There was no correct answer, only survival. The door closed again. The lock clicked. And Lena understood something with terrifying clarity. If she stayed here, she would not leave alive. Her breath shook. Her chest burned. Panic clawed its way up her throat, but beneath it, something else stirred. Not hope. Desperation. The kind that stripped fear down to its bones. She remembered a story. A rumor whispered years ago by strangers who laughed nervously as they spoke it. A name said like a curse and a prayer at the same time. A king who ruled in darkness, older than empires, who answered only when called with true need. Lena had never believed in legends. But belief no longer mattered. Her lips trembled as she whispered into the darkness, voice barely more than breath. "Please, if anyone hears me, I need help." Nothing happened. Tears slipped silently down her temples. Foolish. Childish. She had spoken to shadows. Then the cold came. Not creeping, falling. The air turned sharp and heavy, her breath turning white in front of her face. The darkness in the corner of the basement thickened, folding in on itself, until it moved. A figure stepped forward. Tall. Still. Wrapped in shadows that bent around him like living things. Silver eyes caught the faint light and reflected it back, inhuman, ancient, unreadable. "You called," he said. His voice was calm, deep, and absolute. Lena tried to move, but her body refused. Fear rooted her in place as the figure knelt before her, studying her injuries with quiet intensity. "Who did this to you?" "My husband," she whispered. "He locked me here. He said I belonged to him." The temperature dropped again. Frost spread across the stone floor like veins of ice. The Vampire King rose slowly, power humming through the air. "You are wrong," he said softly. "You belong to no one." With a single motion, the restraints shattered. Strong, cold hands steadied her as her strength failed, holding her not like a prisoner, but like something fragile. "I am Asrian," he said. "And you are under my protection now." As the world folded into darkness around them, Lena realized the truth. She had not been saved by magic. She had been seen. The palace did not feel like a monster's lair. That was the first thing Lena noticed when the darkness unfolded and reality steadied again. She expected chains, cold cages, screaming wind. Instead, she stood in a vast chamber of black stone warmed by silent firelight. Candles burned in tall iron holders, their flames strangely steady, as if even air obeyed the rules here. Above her, the ceiling rose into shadows so high it looked like night had been carved into architecture. Lena's knees buckled. Asrian caught her before she hit the floor, his hands firm and controlled, holding her like she was breakable. He didn't squeeze. He didn't drag. He didn't claim. He simply kept her upright, as if her survival mattered more than his pride. "You are safe," he said. Safe. The word felt unreal, like a language she had forgotten. Her body shook with delayed fear. In the basement she had been too numb to tremble, too hungry to cry. But here, with warmth and silence surrounding her, her chest cracked open. Tears arrived without permission, hot and sudden. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would you help me? Asrian's silver eyes held hers, steady, ancient, unblinking. Because no one should be buried alive while others walk freely above them. It wasn't anger in his voice. It was certainty. He guided her to a chair near the blue flames of a fireplace. The heat was gentle, not burning, like a hand placed carefully against bruised skin. Lena flinched when the chair creaked. The sound reminded her of stairs, of locks, of footsteps that decided her fate. Asrian noticed. His gaze flicked to the door as if he could hear memories the way others heard sound. In my realm, he said quietly, fear is not a tool. It is a sickness. And I do not allow sickness to rule my house. A soft knock came. Lena's spine went rigid. Instinct screamed at her to apologize, to explain, to promise she would do better, because that was what her life had trained her to do. But the door opened, and no cruelty stepped through. An older woman entered with calm, practiced grace. Her hair was pinned neatly, and she wore an apron embroidered with small silver threadwork. Her eyes were kind in the way of someone who had seen suffering and refused to become hard because of it. Your Majesty, she said, bowing. You sent for me. This is Mera, Asrian told Lena. She governs the household. She will help you recover. Mera's gaze softened instantly as she took in Lena's bruises, her trembling hands, the way she sat like she might be punished for existing. Oh, sweetheart, Mera murmured, not as a servant, but as a human being.
Come.
Let's get you warm and fed. Lena tried to say she was fine. The line nearly climbed out of her throat out of habit. But Asrian's eyes sharpened, not cruel, truth-demanding. And suddenly Lena couldn't do it. Not here. Not in a place where kindness was real. I'm not fine, she admitted. Mera nodded as if she had expected that. Good, she said gently. Then we'll start with honesty. It's the first step back to yourself. She led Lena into a bathing room that looked like a dream built for someone who had forgotten what comfort was. Marble tub. Steam rising. Towels stacked like clouds. Oils that smelled of lavender and cedar, something grounding. Lena stood frozen, unsure how to accept anything without paying for it later. Mera touched her shoulder lightly. No one will come in and demand you scrub the floor after this, she promised. No one will punish you for resting. You are not a burden here. Lena's throat tightened. I don't know how to be here. You will learn, Mera said. Slowly. When the bath finally wrapped heat around Lena's bones, it felt like her body exhaled for the first time in years. She scrubbed the basement off her skin until the water turned grey, then darker, then cleared again. She watched it drain away and wondered if fear could drain away too. She dressed in a simple gown Mera left, soft, deep blue, modest and warm. It fit perfectly, which only made Lena's eyes sting again. Someone had prepared for her as if she mattered. As if her comfort was expected, not earned through suffering. Food waited by the fire. Soup, thick and fragrant. Bread, still warm. Butter melting into gold. Lena ate carefully at first, afraid her stomach would reject kindness. But hunger softened into relief, and relief softened into something dangerous. Hope. The door opened quietly. Lena's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. A child stood in the doorway. He was small, 6, maybe 7, with hair as dark as midnight and eyes as silver as Asrian's. He held a stuffed creature against his chest, something between a dragon and a wolf, worn from years of love. The boy stared at Lena as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. Then his hands moved. Fast. Fluent. Beautiful. Lena blinked helplessly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't understand. The child's face fell, disappointment flickering like a candle shadow. A tall figure appeared behind him. Asrian. His presence shifted the entire room the way a storm shifts the air. But when his gaze dropped to the child, something softened, something no court would ever see. This is my son, he said. Kale. Kale tugged his father's sleeve, signing rapidly. Asrian's hands answered, slower, precise. Then he looked at Lena. He asked if you are the woman who called me. Lena swallowed. Yes. Kale's eyes widened. He signed again, more urgently. Asrian translated. He asked, if you are brave. The question hit Lena like a strike to the chest. Because she didn't feel brave. She felt like someone who survived by shrinking. But Kale was watching her, really watching, as if her answer mattered. Lena set the spoon down. She forced her shoulders to straighten. I didn't feel brave, she admitted softly. But I didn't want to die unseen. So I spoke. Even though I was terrified. Asrian signed her words. Kale stared for a moment, then smiled. He walked forward and placed the stuffed creature in Lena's lap like an offering. Like trust. Lena's hands trembled as she touched it. It's beautiful. Kale signed again, slower this time, making sure she could see every movement. He pointed to the dragon, then to himself, then made a guarding gesture, like a shield. Asrian's eyes flicked to his son with a trace of pride. He says the dragon protects him from nightmares, he translated. And he thinks it can protect you too. Something inside Lena broke, not in pain, but in release. She pressed the stuffed dragon to her chest, and the tears came again, but these were different. These weren't the tears of a prisoner. They were the tears of someone being treated like a person. Asrian watched her quietly, expression unreadable, but his voice dropped low, almost gentle. Kale does not give his dragon to strangers. Lena looked up. Then why did he? Asrian's silver eyes held hers. Because he recognizes the shape of fear, he said. And because he believes you deserve to be protected. Kale climbed into the chair beside Lena, leaning lightly against her arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then he signed one more question, his face suddenly serious. Asrian's gaze sharpened as he read it. What did he ask? Lena whispered. Asrian's voice came out colder, not toward her, but toward the world. He asked, Asrian said slowly, if the person who hurt you will ever be allowed to hurt you again. The room went silent. Blue flames danced. And Lena realized this wasn't only about her survival anymore. This was about justice. Because the Vampire King's protection was not a promise. It was a law. The palace woke slowly. Lena noticed it first in the way sound returned. Not loud, not sudden, but layered. Footsteps echoing faintly through distant corridors. The whisper of silk. The clink of metal armor. The low murmur of voices that carried authority and judgment in equal measure. She sat near the tall window Mera had shown her, watching pale light creep across the black stone floor. The stuffed dragon rested in her lap, Kale's unspoken promise of protection wrapped in stitched fabric. For the first time in years, Lena had slept without waking to fear. That alone felt like a miracle she didn't deserve. That belief, I don't deserve this, still clung to her like a second skin. When Mera returned with fresh tea, Lena flinched at the sound of boots outside the door. Her hands tightened around the cup. They won't hurt you, Mera said quietly, noticing. But they may look at you as if they can. Lena swallowed. Who are they? The court, Mera answered. And people who forget what power is meant for. As if summoned by the words, the doors at the end of the hall opened. Lena stood without thinking, posture stiff, shoulders pulled inward. The instincts of obedience rushed back, ancient and ugly. She lowered her gaze, bracing herself. They entered in groups, vampires draped in dark finery, their movements elegant and cold. Silver-eyed nobles. Armored guards. Advisors whose expressions were sharpened by centuries of authority. Their eyes swept the room, and then they landed on her. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. A whisper slipped through the air. A human. Here. In the inner chambers. Lena's face burned. She suddenly felt the weight of her borrowed gown, the softness of the rug beneath her feet, the warmth of a palace she had never earned in their eyes. One woman stepped forward, tall and severe, her hair braided with metal threads. Her gaze raked over Lena like an inventory list. Your Majesty, she said coolly, inclining her head toward Asrian, who had entered unnoticed behind the court. Are we now sheltering strays within the royal halls? The word struck like a slap. Lena's chest tightened. Her mouth opened to apologize, to explain, to disappear. Before she could speak, Asrian did. That stray, he said evenly, is under my protection. The room shifted. Power pressed outward from him, not violent, but absolute. The blue flames along the walls flared higher, responding like soldiers to a command. The woman did not back down. With respect, Your Majesty, humans bring complications. Weakness. Attachment. She does not belong. Asrian took one step forward. Every guard stiffened. Every whisper died. She belongs, he said quietly, because I say she does. The court froze. Asrian turned, not to them, but to Lena. His silver eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. Look at me, he said. She did. And for the first time in her life, she did not lower her gaze. This palace exists because I will it too, Asrian continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. Its laws exist to serve justice, not pride. Anyone who cannot remember that is free to leave my court. Silence crashed down like thunder. The noblewoman's lips tightened. She bowed stiffly and stepped back. Others followed, their expressions carefully neutral, but something had changed. Lena felt it. The weight had shifted, not away from her, but toward her. She wasn't invisible anymore. Later, Mera guided Lena through quieter corridors toward the gardens. Lena's hands still trembled. I didn't mean to cause trouble, she whispered. Mera stopped and turned her gently by the shoulders. Child, she said, firm but kind, you did not cause trouble. You exposed it. The garden opened around them like a secret. Moonlight spilled over silver-leaf trees and glowing flowers that hummed softly in the dark. Water flowed through narrow channels, reflecting the stars above. Lena breathed in air that didn't taste like fear. She wasn't alone for long. Asrian emerged from the shadows near the fountain, his presence calm but charged. Kale followed close behind, hands busy signing as he walked. Asrian translated automatically. He says the tall woman was rude. Lena let out a surprised laugh, small, cracked, but real. She was. Kale signed again, more sharply. Asrian's mouth twitched. He says rudeness should have consequences. I agree, Lena said softly. Kale's face lit up. As they sat by the fountain, Kale signed questions, about Lena's favorite colors, about whether humans dreamed differently, about why she flinched when voices grew loud. Lena answered the best she could, speaking while Asrian translated. Each answer felt like laying down a stone of herself in a place where it might stay. Then Kale paused. His hands slowed. He signed something different. Asrian stiffened. What did he ask? Lena asked, heart suddenly pounding. Asrian's gaze lingered on his son before returning to her. He asked, he said carefully, why you reacted to the royal seal on the floor earlier. Lena blinked. The seal. Asrian nodded. When you entered the hall, you froze when you saw it. Most humans never notice it at all. Lena's mind replayed the moment, the black and silver symbol carved into the stone. Twisted lines. A shape that felt familiar. I've seen it before, she said slowly. Not like that. But something similar. In a book. When I was a child. Asrian went very still. Where? He asked. Lena frowned, searching memory. An old shelter library. There was a damaged manuscript. The symbols were different, but the meaning felt the same. Protection. Oaths. A promise that power must answer suffering. Asrian's breath stilled. Kale stared at her, eyes wide. You shouldn't know that, Asrian said quietly. I don't know how I know it, Lena admitted. I just felt it. The garden seemed to lean closer, shadows listening. Asrian straightened slowly. That seal predates my crown, he said. It belongs to the First Covenant. A law older than my bloodline. Lena's heart pounded. What does it mean? Asrian looked at her, not as a rescued human, not as a guest, but as something newly uncertain. It means, he said carefully, that you may not be here by chance. Kale signed one final question, his hands trembling with excitement. Asrian swallowed. He asked, Asrian said, voice low, if you are the one from the promise. Lena stared at them, breath caught between fear and wonder. The night deepened around them. And somewhere in the palace, ancient laws stirred, awakening to the presence of a human girl who was never meant to be invisible. The palace did not forget. Once Lena's presence had been noticed, it could not be undone. Eyes followed her through the corridors now, some curious, some cautious, some sharp with resentment. Respect had been commanded for her by the vampire king himself, but respect given by decree is fragile. It cracks easily in the hands of those who believe power belongs only to bloodlines and centuries. Lena felt it most when Asrian was not beside her. The whispers returned in softer forms. Conversations paused when she entered a room. Servants bowed too quickly, nervously, afraid of being seen as too kind, or too familiar. The kindness she received was real, but it was careful, conditional. And then there were the others. Lady Virella did not hide her disdain. She was ancient even by vampire standards, her beauty sharpened by arrogance, her voice smooth as polished steel. She encountered Lena one afternoon in the Western Gallery, where sunlight filtered weakly through enchanted glass. Lena had been studying the wall carvings, drawn again to symbols that made her chest ache with half-remembered meaning. Astonishing, Virella said coolly, appearing at her side. How easily sympathy bends a crown. Lena stiffened. She lowered her eyes out of reflex, then caught herself. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her gaze. I'm sorry, she said. Virella smiled without warmth. You are a guest here, she continued. And guests should remember their place. Lena's hands trembled, but she kept them at her sides. I don't want trouble, she said quietly. I only want peace. Virella leaned closer. Peace, she murmured, is not granted to those who inspire weakness. Before Lena could respond, footsteps echoed down the hall. Asrian. The air shifted the moment he entered, power tightening like drawn breath. Virella stepped back instantly, her expression smoothing into courtly obedience. Your Majesty, she said. Asrian's silver eyes flicked between them. You forget yourself, he said calmly. Of course not, Virella replied. I was merely reminding your guest that the palace is not a refuge for human sentiment. Asrian's gaze hardened. Then let me remind you, he said, voice cold and precise, that this palace is ruled by law, not cruelty disguised as tradition. Virella bowed deeply, but her eyes flashed with something ugly before she turned away. Lena exhaled shakily. You don't have to fight for me, she said once they were alone. I don't want to be the reason your court turns against you. Asrian studied her in silence. Power that fears kindness is already rotten, he said. If they turn, that is their failing, not yours. That night, the dream came. Lena stood in darkness, not the basement, but something older. Stone beneath her feet was etched with glowing symbols, the same ones that had called to her since her arrival. Voices echoed without mouths, speaking in a language she did not know, and yet understood. When power hears suffering, it must answer. She woke with a gasp, heart racing. And then she smelled it. Fear. Sharp. Familiar. Real. The scent pulled memory from her bones, and Lena sat upright, panic flooding her veins. The palace was silent, but the silence felt wrong. Too tight. Too expectant. A scream shattered it. Lena was on her feet before she realized she had moved, bare feet hitting cold stone as she ran toward the sound. Guards flooded the corridors, weapons drawn. Somewhere behind her, Asrian's power surged awake. They found him in the outer hall. Her husband. His eyes were wild, his posture twisted with terror and fury. The compulsion Asrian had placed on his mind was cracked, broken by desperation and rage. He had followed her, tracked her, and now that he stood inside the palace, surrounded by creatures that terrified him, he lashed out with the only weapon he had left. You belong to me, he screamed when he saw her. You can't hide behind monsters forever. The word belong hit Lena like a blow. She froze. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the basement again. The floor. The cold. The certainty of being owned. Then a small hand slipped into hers. Cale. He stood beside her, eyes blazing, fingers tight around her shaking hand. He signed fiercely, movements sharp with emotion. Asrian appeared between them and the intruder in a blink, power roaring like a storm barely contained. This ends now, Asrian said. The man laughed hysterically. You think fear will stop me? She's nothing without someone telling her what to do. The words echoed. Lena felt something shift, not break, but harden. She stepped forward. Asrian's head snapped toward her. Lena. I need to do this, she said softly. She looked at the man who had reduced her world to a basement. Her voice shook, but it did not disappear. I don't belong to you, she said. I never did. The man lunged. He never reached her. The floor erupted with light. The ancient symbols carved into the palace ignited, blazing silver and blue, forming a barrier between Lena and danger. The air screamed with power older than the crown, older than blood. Everyone froze. Asrian stared in disbelief. Cale gasped silently. Lena stood at the center of it, hands glowing faintly, eyes wide with shock. I didn't mean to, she whispered. Asrian dropped to one knee. Not in submission. In recognition. The covenant, he breathed. You have awakened it. Guards dragged the man away, screaming, as the symbols faded, but the truth did not. The palace would never be the same. And neither would Lena. Because the helpless girl sealed in a basement had just stood unbroken before a king. And power had answered her, not as a victim, but as a chosen voice of justice. The palace breathed differently after that night. Not louder. Not brighter. Truer. The ancient symbols Lena had awakened no longer slept beneath the stone. They lingered, faintly visible to those who knew how to look, humming like a memory that refused to be buried again. Whispers spread through the court, but this time they carried or instead of contempt. A human had activated the first covenant. Not through blood. Not through power. But through refusal to kneel to cruelty. Lena felt the weight of it in the days that followed. Respect no longer came only from Asrian's shadow. It came from distance, from bowed heads, from silence heavy with thought. Yet the change that mattered most was inside her. She no longer walked as if the floor might disappear beneath her feet. She walked as if she belonged. Asrian stood beside her on the high balcony overlooking the inner court, moonlight silvering his dark hair. For centuries, he had ruled from certainty. Now, something unfamiliar rested in his chest. Choice. You could stay, he said quietly. Or you could leave. The covenant does not bind you to me, or to this realm. Lena studied the stars beyond the palace walls. For most of my life, she said softly, every choice was made for me. Even kindness came with a price. She turned to face him. This is the first time I've been asked what I want. Asrian inclined his head, not as a king, but as a man. Then tell me. Before Lena could answer, small hands tugged at her sleeve. Cale. He stood between them, eyes bright, fingers already moving. Lena had begun learning his language, slowly, carefully, because some voices deserved patience. Cale signed with determination. Asrian translated, his voice catching despite himself. He says, the covenant chose you because you listen. Because you protect without ruling. Because you know fear, and did not become it. Lena knelt so she was level with Cale. I'm still afraid sometimes, she admitted. Cale signed back instantly. Asrian swallowed. He says bravery is not the absence of fear. It's standing anyway. Lena smiled, tears blurring her vision. Then he's braver than anyone I know. Cale grinned and leaned into her, head resting against her shoulder. Asrian watched the moment like something sacred, his son choosing trust, choosing safety, choosing her. That night, the court gathered. Not for judgment. For reckoning. Asrian stood before them, crown untouched, voice steady. The covenant exists to remind us why power was created, he said. To answer suffering. To end cruelty. To protect those denied a voice. His gaze swept the hall. Any who rule through fear alone are unfit to rule at all. Lady Virella stepped forward, pale and rigid. And the human, she asked. What is her place? Asrian did not answer. Lena did. She stepped into the center of the hall, heart pounding, but steady. I won't be your queen, she said calmly. Gasps rippled. And I won't be your symbol. Silence fell. I will be your reminder, Lena continued. That power should bow to justice. That silence is not consent. And that no one, human or immortal, belongs in chains. The covenant flared once more, soft and brilliant. It accepted her words. Virella lowered her gaze. So did the court. Later, as dawn crept into the sky, Lena stood at the threshold of a choice. Beyond the gates lay the human world, uncertain, imperfect, free. Behind her stood a realm transformed by her presence. Asrian faced her, expression unreadable. If you go, he said, I will not follow. Not as a ruler. Not as a rescuer. Lena reached for his hand. I don't want a savior, she said. I want a partner who walks beside me. Asrian's breath caught. Slowly, carefully, he knelt. Not as a king. As a man. Then walk with me, he said. Wherever you choose to stand. Lena smiled. She chose both worlds. Not because she had to, but because she finally could. And in doing so, she proved a truth older than legend. The strongest power is not domination. It is dignity.